I was at an AAOE meeting and someone said, what's your biggest fear? So I said, this is interesting because I've been with my job for 20 years and my biggest fear is, and so my advice would be don't have fear as any sort of motivator of a decision.
And what inspired you, after being with a group for 24 years, what made you say, okay, let me make the jump over here to Vail-Summit?
It's kind of a long story. So I'll try to give you the kind of the trimmed down version of that. Basically, there are a couple things at play. One is the group went private equity.
Oh, that alone.
Yeah, well, that can always have, some obvious, and sometimes as we're finding, similar results. But going back a bit too, what's interesting is I was at an AAOE meeting and one of the general sessions or something, and someone said, the speaker said, hey, what's your biggest fear? And then you're supposed to talk to the people around you who, you don't know and kind of get to know them and everything else. And I said, this is interesting because I've been with my job for 20 years and my biggest fear is losing my job. And, because I thought that was kind of funny, I didn't know why. And then she said something asked a question that was so profound to me. And that was, what was the biggest trauma in your childhood? And suddenly it just hit me because now I had very loving parents and everything, but we moved around quite a bit. And my dad had several different jobs, careers, and everything else. And so, and this is nothing against them, but this was my reaction to my childhood. And interesting, my brothers too. My brother's been at the same job for now 30 some odd years.
Wow.
I wanted that stability.
Yeah.
Right. Which I did not have. Now, again, I'm not blaming anything. It was just my experience. And so that was kind of my biggest fear. And even though I'd been at a place for so long, that was fiercely important to me to hold on to that for some sort of security. And it's just interesting how that happened. So there, with the private equity and the merging and all these different groups, there just was like, oh, we got too many people. We got too many CEOs. We got too many. And so I took this job at Vail-Summit Orthopaedics Neurosurgery, which I've had some exposure to previously. We'd gone out to Vail early on in my career to check out, the Stedman Clinic, what they're doing. And then later on, Vail-Summit reached out to me to check out our EMR system. So I'd had, relations with the area and with the group itself. Previously, I thought, well, this could be fun. And then going from one ski town to another.
I was going to say, you've lived in two very cool, sought after places like Tahoe, Vail.
Yep. Yeah. And you know what? It totally spoiled in that, and I go somewhere else and I'm just, I'm such a snob. It's like, where's all the big trees? Where's the lake? Where's the mountain? Where's the river?
Although I bet though, if you come out this way on the East Coast or where I live, you'd be like, wow, it costed me 1/2 of what it would be to get a cheese.
Right? Yeah. And that's another thing. It's pretty pricey. It's pretty expensive.
Yes.
Right?
2026, the talent market is still unfortunately candidate driven. And that creates issues of compression with your current team and what they're making. And then if you are hiring, what you're bringing in the new person at. Obviously, experience plays a huge role in this, but there's also kind of a general guideline that we can follow. And lucky for you, I've created a free copy of salary averages for PAs by state. So if you're listening and you're curious and want to have that copy, whether you're hiring or wanting to just compare and kind of see where you align, then feel free to reach out to me and I'll send you a free copy. Madison@advancedscopetalent.com.
So it's kind of a balance of all that, but it was nice because a lot of these ski towns and high tourist areas, they have some unique issues with orthopedics and the seasonal work and all the housing issues. And so Vail is different than Tahoe in a lot of ways, but then there's some similarities too, which I think I was able to transition over and understand, some of the things that we faced. So
that's really cool though. I think sometimes when we look inward, like you said, you get so caught up in what I call stirring the oatmeal on the day-to-day, right? I get up, I go to work. This is what I do. This is who I am. This is where I live. And I kind of had the opposite where like my parents were in the same job their entire lives. They were school teachers and they would always complain about the monotony of it and the government kind of controlling things when it came to testing and how they were able to be creative as teachers back in the 90s versus, when I was in school. And I always wanted the opposite of that. I wanted the freedom and flexibility to live where I wanted and not feel bound by just a school system and feeling like somebody was telling me how to do my job all the time. So it is interesting how our upbringing, and it's not a fault. It's just the reality of what you grew up around, we're all doing our best, right?
Mm-hmm.
How that then lends into your career, because even my brothers, they're the same way. They've not jumped around, but they've moved out from where we lived and they've done completely different types of careers where they've had a lot more autonomy and flexibility than my parents ever did.
And that's interesting to say that, because our kids, we have 3 adult kids, and they have not necessarily taken the traditional, what I would see. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just, I think they felt enough maybe security growing up because of, the job, that they've taken all sorts of chances, and, they've been able to do that. And then looking back, my grandfather, which I never met, they all passed before, my grandparents all passed before I knew them, but had a steady job at General Electric at a light bulb factory in Ohio. And so maybe my dad then felt a bit more, hey, I'm free to roam around because I have that security and everything else. So yeah, I do think that upbringing can play a major role. And I think it is important to try to seek it out and try to understand it too, because I think it can explain motives, it can explain reactions, and how we view things and how others view things too.
Or even how we're holding ourselves back because of a fear that isn't really anything to be fearful of. It's just what we're used to. It's just what we somehow tell ourselves is a roadblock, even though we can just move it and go, oh, wait, this wasn't as bad as I thought it was, or I don't know what I was fearful of. There's security over here too.
Yeah, no, great point.
That is super interesting.